Hi, I'm James McGuire, and on today's eSpeaks, we're talking about data literacy, a very hot topic here in 2022. It turns out that improved data literacy helps with employee retention, a very important fact as we deal with the so-called Great Resignation. To discuss data literacy, I'm joined by Andrew Beers, Chief Technical Officer of Tableau. Andrew, absolutely thrilled to have you with us today.
James, really nice to be here. Thank you.
And how is your week going this week? Is this a hard week, an easy week? Are you just happy to be on Friday? What's the world of Andrew Beers today?
It's been a very varied year so far. So there's always a lot going on, but that's kind of what makes life interesting.
Totally. So there's a report that talks about data literacy and employee retention. But first, let's figure out exactly what is data literacy. I mean, we get the broad idea, but what specifically is it? And perhaps most importantly, how can or should companies quantify data literacy?
Yeah, James, thanks for that question. I think it's a great place to start. I want to say that at its heart, data literacy is the ability to explore, understand, and communicate with data. So let's unpack that a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
We think if you're data literate, you understand how any data that you're working with is defined. You know how to ask the right questions and connect those questions to data. You know how to measure and describe and summarize that data. And above all, you know how to make informed decisions from that data and share how you came to those decisions and answers with others. Now, that probably sounds like a lot, and it is. But we are in a really important time in the history of data. We know that these data literacy skills are going to become table stakes. And that report that you talked about has told us that 82% of decision makers really expect this basic data literacy from employees really across all departments. But only about 39% of these organizations that were surveyed in the report are making training available to all employees. And that just leaves this gap. It leaves this gap that leaders are really pushing down that responsibility of training employees down to the employees themselves, or maybe to the little work groups that they're part of.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you also asked about how to measure it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's probably a couple of different ways of measuring it. But one thing I think the report also makes clear is that leaders aren't really questioning the why. Like, they know that this is important, but they are sort of stuck on how to make it work. So how can you measure it, right? You can look at how your company is investing in data skills training. You can look at measuring engagement that employees and leaders within the company have with those programs and how they're making progress about it. You can also look at project teams and have them do things like self-assessments, like how are we working with data? Are we using data to make our decisions? Are we bringing data into the conversation, or are we continuing to lead with our gut? I think it's going to be different for every organization. I think there's a lot of variation out there on how mature people are and organizations are on their data literacy. So it's really important to get started for all companies to look at this and to make sure that they're taking those first steps to really improve their data literacy.
All right, so the report covers a lot of ground, absolutely. It does say that data training is key to fighting the Great Resignation. It makes the point that 80% of data trained staffers are more likely to stay with their employer. So what else do you see as particularly important about the report?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things that I would call out on this topic. The first one is something that I kind of touched on a moment ago. Data skills they're not just for specialists anymore. We're seeing that the need for data skills across sort of every department, every line of business inside a company.
Mm-hmm.
Analytics has changed a lot over the last 20 years, and I've been doing analytics now for about 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
Before Tableau and tools and organizations like Tableau came into being, there were just a few people in an organization, usually in IT or engineering, that really managed this business intelligence and data analytics function.
Mm-hmm.
And they were essentially report factories working off ticketing systems, like, please go answer this question for me. Business leaders, information workers, they weren't really empowered to work with data themselves, to ask and answer those questions themselves. But we know that today is a different story. Like, data skills are now a necessity for workers across every department: IT, HR, operations, engineering, like, you name it. We've also seen that, data skills are, one of these skills that's increased most in importance over the last few years.
Mhm.
It's even more important now in many people's opinion than project management, than communication skills, than other computer skills.
Mhm.
So that, I think, is something that all leaders should really take to heart. Like, don't look at this report and say, "Oh, this doesn't apply to me." This is something that really applies to you. So that's one part, just in how data skills have changed.
Mhm.
The second part would be, as you said, like, data skills, investing in data skills are key to combating this great resignation that's happening now. And you referred to in the report that, 80% said they're more likely to stay with their company if they're getting invested in from a data skills perspective.
Mhm.
So I think that's going to mean that we're going to see the companies that are prioritizing upping people's data skills and data training, we're going to see them be more agile. We're going to see them the ability to adapt to change in the future. And ultimately, we're going to see them being the ones able to survive as we move off into the future, where it's a much more data-centric world. So, I would call on to business leaders, like, make sure that you're investing in this.
So something you said reminded me of this theme, the democratization of analytics. It used to be, as you say, just for the data scientists. Now it's really for all the staffers. I'm not sure what my question is, but it seems like that's, this big moment in the history of data analytics you talked about is about the democratization of analytics. Agree?
I would definitely agree with that. We are seeing people across really all functions being expected to work with data as part of their job, being expected to bring, sound reasoning and sound decision making grounded in the data that's important to the business to those decision making capabilities. We're seeing companies, start to move more of the decision making out into various business units, and with that motion is coming an expectation that people are bringing data to those decisions. So totally agree.
Mhm. All right. So we know that data training is vital to employee success and retention. How can companies prioritize it?
Yeah, I would definitely agree that it's vital to employee success and retention, but I would also add that it's vital to an organization's success as well.
Hmm.
It used to be, when I talked to people from a variety of different companies, they would say, well, if we don't have people with the data skills, that's really inconvenient. It's slowing us down. And now more and more of them are saying, look, if you're not data driven, if you don't have people with the right data skills around, if you don't have that attitude inside your organization, you won't be around in 20 years. Like, it is now an existential question for organizations.
Hmm.
So that's about, getting people on the organization that are data literate. It's about getting them access to the right training, to the right data. Otherwise, these companies are going to fall behind. So as an example, take, a very, very data intensive set of technology, AI and machine learning.
Hmm.
99% of the Fortune 1000 companies are investing in AI and machine learning over the next 5 years, right? That level of work with data is super important.
Hmm.
But of course, the biggest challenge that people face around investing in things like this is the lack of appropriate skills within their workforce. And those
Hmm.
skills are all very much around data skills, right? If I want to do AI, if I want to do machine learning, I've got to have the right data skills in there, because they're fundamentally data technologies. So you have to invest in people, you have to invest in their skilling in order to continue to take advantage of these more advanced technologies that people want to use. So how to do that,
Yeah.
right? There's
Yeah.
a couple.
Please,
Go ahead.
that's really the
Sure.
question. So what are the specific steps the company should take?
Yeah. So there's a couple things that I think you can do, right? I think it's really, really important for leaders to really lead on this, right? Companies that are successful in working with data really do this from the top. Like this, the C-level people inside your company have to be talking about data and how they're going to use it to run the business, to make decisions, et cetera. So, leaders need to be able to put frameworks in place to set goals that are very data informed, to structure initiatives that are going to use data and how you're going to measure the success of those initiatives. You need to incentivize people inside the company. So, we talked at the beginning about, putting in skilling programs and looking at how people engage with them. Okay, well, we have to incentivize people to do that. You have to be able to reward people for when they are appropriately using data and using that to make really good decisions.
Mhm.
And I think, most importantly, like, making space at all levels of the organization for learning and development and coming together, in a community, so that people can learn from each other, can encourage each other. You can showcase where data is being used appropriately and how it is advancing your business.
Do you recommend some sort of a course system, like you take this 8-week course, or not necessarily? It's more interwoven than that.
It is a combination. I mean, there are people at certain parts of their journey, they're going to need a course, right? You're going to have to sit down and sort of learn the basics of, working with data and asking the right questions and whatnot. But you're going to get to a certain point where it becomes about, continuing to develop those skills. And that's going to be around setting the right goals. It's going to be around having people come together and sort of demonstrate how this is done. We've seen companies sort of bring large sets of leaders together and have project team after project team get up and say, here was our business challenge. Here's the data that we collected around it. Here's the experiments that we ran. Here's the results that we achieved by taking this data-oriented approach to working, to solving a business problem. And that does wonders inside a company, because you get encouragement from your peers, you celebrate the success of other peers, you break down projects that didn't work out and ask the question why, and then everybody improves at that point.
All right, well, let's look to the future of data literacy. But definitely, it appears that the data literacy of workers is growing rapidly. On the other hand, the need for it is also growing rapidly. It's a bit of a horse race. What do you see for the future of data literacy, say a few years from now?
Absolutely. I think that in the future, we're going to say that every person is going to be a data person, because it is expected by so many people in so many different lines of work. In the report, it showed that by 2025, 70% of employees will be expected to use data heavily in their job. And that is up from now, which is great. And by using data heavily, they're going to be making those day-to-day decisions based on data, based on critical thinking that is backed up by data. And that, I think, is going to improve just what companies can do. We see this in our personal lives too. I mean, how much are people exposed to data in their everyday life? I mean, just over the past 2 years, we have all gotten used to looking at COVID-19 data, pandemic models, vaccination rates, infection rates, et cetera. And so we're all being called on to work to reason about data in our daily lives too. How do I understand risk? How do I understand how I should be, behaving? We see organizations. We're in Seattle. We see the Seattle Seahawks and how they use data to make sure that they're delivering the great experience for their fans. Whether that's during entering and exiting the stadium, parking, food, beverage, you name it. They use data everywhere, and we're just going to see that continue to expand, across all companies, and that means this greater need for data literacy, as you referred to, because we think understanding data and being able to use it responsibly requires this basic data literacy. Go ahead.
I was going to say, it's fascinating. I'd love to just get your sense before we go. I love that as a wrap up, just a sense of like the analytics market. I sometimes get it that there's a certain continuing tension among executives of like, we're going to run this, by our instinct, but of course we know we need to look at the metrics, and that tension feels like it hasn't totally gone away. But what is your sense among business leaders running the business with the metrics versus running the business through instinct?
Yeah, so you're right that both of those are there, and both of those will continue to be there, frankly. I think, there is need for good instincts. Like at the end of the day, we have to understand the business that we're operating. We have to understand the context in which we operate it. And data is going to inform that perspective. Like it won't just be instinct. It won't be just my reading of the tea leaves. It is going to be like a whole bunch of different sources of data coming together to essentially take my instinct and support it or refute it and change it, and allow me to adapt to the changing conditions in my business, in my industry, and just make better decisions overall.
Fascinating. Andrew, I think you said it. It's going to be a very interesting sector to follow in the years ahead. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise today.
Thanks, James. It was a great conversation.